The day was bright, the store bustling with activity. It was a small, local business located on the corner of a busy street, known for its carefully curated products and the friendly service that made regulars feel like family. The saleswoman, Sarah, had worked there for 2 years, and she prided herself on providing excellent customer service. But on this particular day, a customer would walk in who would challenge her views and her understanding of customer relations. As Sarah arranged some of the newly stocked merchandise near the counter, she noticed a man walk into the store. At Oxy, first he blended in with the rest of the customers, casual attire, a plain shirt, and jeans. But then her eyes landed on his hat. It was a red MAGA hat, the one emblazoned with the words, "Make America Great Again." A surge of irritation rushed through her, as it often did when she saw the symbol. She knew the political divide it represented and had heard enough about its controversial nature to make a judgment about the kind of person who would wear it. Sarah's face tightened, but she quickly composed herself. She knew better than to let personal feelings show when working with customers. But something about this man's hat bothered her deeply. Perhaps it was the divisive rhetoric it symbolized, or perhaps it was the growing tension in the air whenever such symbols were present in public spaces. She couldn't shake the feeling that he was someone who supported policies she couldn't stand. As the man walked further into the store, browsing the shelves, Sarah's discomfort grew. She couldn't concentrate on her tasks anymore, her thoughts constantly drifting back to the man and his MAGA hat. The more she thought about it, the more certain she became that she needed to act. After all, she was proud of her beliefs, and she believed the store should be a place free from the divisiveness that such symbols brought. She slowly approached him, trying to maintain her calm demeanor. When she reached him, she cleared her throat. "Excuse me, sir," she said, her voice firm yet polite. "I'm going to have to ask you to leave the store. We don't allow political symbols like that here." The man looked at her with surprise, his eyebrows furrowing. He seemed momentarily taken aback, as if he hadn't expected such a response. Sarah's eyes locked onto his hat, her hands clasped tightly in front of her, trying to steady herself. "I'm sorry, but I don't think I understand," he said, his tone measured, though clearly confused. "I just came in to look around." Sarah shook her head slightly, her own frustration building. "I know, but that hat, it's a political statement, and I don't think it's appropriate in here. We're trying to keep the store a welcoming space for everyone, and it's clear that hat doesn't represent that." The man's expression hardened for a moment, but he quickly masked it with a polite smile. He didn't argue, didn't raise his voice. He simply nodded. "I see," he said, turning to leave. As he turned, Sarah couldn't help but feel a small sense of triumph. She had stood up for what she believed in. The store was hers to protect, and she wasn't going to let anyone bring in a symbol that she thought was harmful. But then, just as he reached the door, the man stopped. He didn't exit the store. Instead, he turned to face Sarah, his gaze steady. "You know," he began, his voice calm but with a slight edge to it, "I think there's been a misunderstanding." Sarah blinked, her posture stiffening. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice still firm, though a little uncertain. "No, I'm the owner of this store," he said simply. "That's my store you just kicked me out of." The words hung in the air for a moment as Sarah processed them. Her eyes widened in disbelief. Her stomach dropped, and she felt her face flush. You're the owner?" she asked, her voice suddenly much smaller than before. The reality of what she had done hit her like a wave. The man gave a small nod. "Yes, I am, and I'm afraid I don't appreciate being asked to leave my own business." Sarah felt a rush of panic, a deep sense of embarrassment flooding her. She had just kicked the owner out of his own store. She wanted to explain herself, to justify her actions, but the words caught in her throat. What could she say? That she didn't like his hat? That she didn't agree with his political views? None of it seemed to matter now. The man wasn't just a customer. He was the person who owned everything she worked for. I didn't. No, she stammered, taking a step back. I'm sorry, I thought... I know what you thought, he interrupted gently, though there was a noticeable tension in his voice. But that doesn't change the fact that you asked me to leave based on assumptions. I'd appreciate it if, in the future, you could keep personal politics out of your professional conduct. Sarah's mind raced as she tried to find the right thing to say, but she was at a loss. She had acted impulsively, based on her own political views, and had assumed that the man in the MAGA hat shared the same beliefs as others who wore it. It never occurred to her that he might be different, that he might be the very person who owned the business she worked for. The man didn't say another word. He simply turned and left the store, leaving Sarah standing there, her thoughts spiraling. She knew she had made a mistake, but the weight of her error was hard to grasp. She had allowed her personal politics to cloud her judgment, leading to a situation where she could lose her job over a misunderstanding. As the door closed behind him, Sarah stood frozen for a few moments before shaking herself out of the stupor. She took a deep breath, trying to collect her thoughts. She needed to make things right. She couldn't undo what had been done, but perhaps there was a way to repair the damage. Sarah quickly grabbed her phone and texted her manager, asking for a moment of her time. She needed to talk. The conversation that would follow would undoubtedly be difficult, but it was one that would force Sarah to confront not only the mistakes she had made, but also her own biases. In the end, she learned a powerful lesson. Personal beliefs have no place in a professional setting, especially when it comes to treating customers fairly. The incident would stay with her for a long time, but she hoped it would serve as a reminder to be more mindful in the future, no matter how strongly she felt about the issues at hand. It was a busy Thursday afternoon, and the local store was full of its usual mix of customers. The shelves were lined with unique merchandise, and the smell of freshly brewed coffee filled the air. Sarah, the store's saleswoman, had worked there for 2 years. She knew the regulars by name and prided herself on the friendly, welcoming atmosphere she helped create. That afternoon, as she was rearranging a display near the front, a man walked in. He appeared to be in his late 40s, wearing a faded red baseball cap with the words, "Make America Great Again," boldly stitched on the front. Sarah's eyes immediately locked onto the hat, and a knot formed in her stomach. She had seen enough of the controversial symbol on the news and social media to know it represented a political stance she didn't support. Her mind raced. She tried to shake off her initial reaction, reminding herself that she should always approach customers with an open mind. But her gut feeling told her that this man, just like so many others who wore such hats, probably shared beliefs she found deeply troubling. She tried to focus on her work, but the feeling of discomfort lingered. Sarah was a passionate person, and her beliefs were important to her. She had spent countless hours discussing politics with friends and family, advocating for the causes she believed in, and fighting against what she considered harmful ideologies. The presence of someone who openly wore a MAGA hat seemed like a direct challenge to those beliefs. She didn't want to start a confrontation, but at the same time, she didn't feel comfortable letting it slide. After a few minutes of internal struggle, Sarah made up her mind. She would approach the man, politely ask him to remove the hat, and explain that the store was a space where they tried to keep things neutral and welcoming for everyone. It wasn't personal, she told herself. It was about maintaining a positive environment for all customers. She took a deep breath and walked toward him. "Excuse me, sir," she began, trying to sound professional despite the tension she felt in her chest. "I'm going to have to ask you to remove your hat. We don't allow political symbols in here." The man looked at her, seemingly surprised by the request. He was quiet for a moment, as though processing what she had said. Sarah felt a brief pang of doubt but pushed it aside. He had to understand, she was just doing her job. "I'm sorry," he replied, his voice calm but confused. "It's just a hat. I'm not bothering anyone." "I understand, but it's a political statement," Sarah said firmly. "And this store is a place where we want to keep things neutral. We don't allow political symbols like that." The man's eyes narrowed slightly, his surprise shifting to something more guarded. Sarah wasn't sure whether he was angry or just confused, but she didn't back down. She had made her decision, and in her mind, she was standing up for what was right. "I don't think you understand," the man said, his tone more serious now. "This is just a hat. I didn't come in here to make a political statement. I just wanted to look around." "I know," Sarah said, her voice still unwavering. "But the hat is a statement in itself, and I can't allow it in here." The man sighed, clearly frustrated. He looked around the store as though taking in the atmosphere before meeting Sarah's eyes again. "I don't think this is fair," he said, his voice tinged with disappointment. "I just wanted to buy something, but now you're telling me I'm not welcome because of a hat?" Before Sarah could respond, the man began to slowly take off his hat. He seemed resigned, but there was an edge to his movements, like he was trying to maintain his composure. He held the hat in his hands for a moment, then set it down on the counter. "I'll leave," he said quietly. "But I think you should know something." He paused, glancing around once more. "I own this store." The words hit Sarah like a punch to the stomach. She stared at him, speechless for a moment, her mind racing. You own this store?" she finally managed to say, her voice cracking slightly. The man nodded. "Yes, I do. This is my business, and I've just been asked to leave my own store by one of my employees." Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. The realization that she had just kicked out the owner of the store she worked for was overwhelming. She couldn't believe what had just happened. Her hands trembled as she tried to find the right words. "I'm so sorry," she stammered, feeling a wave of embarrassment wash over her. "I didn't know. I thought you were just another customer." "I know you probably didn't mean any harm," the man replied, his voice calm but tinged with frustration. "But your actions were based on assumptions, and they weren't fair. You don't know anything about me or my views. You saw a hat, and you made a judgment." "I was just trying to keep things neutral," Sarah explained, her face flushing with regret. I thought it would be best to ask you to leave. I didn't want anyone else to feel uncomfortable." "I understand that," the man said, his tone softening slightly. "But I'm the one who's been made uncomfortable. You don't get to decide what symbols are allowed in here. I do." The weight of his words hit Sarah hard. She had let her personal beliefs cloud her judgment and acted without considering the bigger picture. She had made a decision based on assumptions and allowed them to guide her actions. In the end, it wasn't just the MAGA hat that was problematic. It was her own inability to separate her personal opinions from her professional responsibilities. "I'm really sorry," Sarah repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't mean to disrespect you. I just acted without thinking." The man gave a small nod, his expression unreadable. "I appreciate the apology, but I think you need to consider how you treat people moving forward. You're here to work, not to push your own political agenda." Sarah nodded, guilt washing over her. "I'll do better. I promise." The man didn't say anything more. He simply picked up his hat from the counter and turned to leave. As he stepped toward the door, he paused for a moment and looked back at her. "I'll be in touch with the manager," he said. "We'll talk about this." Sarah stood there, watching him leave, the enormity of the situation sinking in. She had made a mistake, one that could have serious consequences. But beyond that, it was a lesson she would never forget. It wasn't about the hat or the political views it represented. It was about treating others with respect, regardless of their beliefs, and understanding that assumptions have consequences. She had learned that lesson the hard way, and she hoped that, moving forward, she would remember it every time she interacted with a customer. The small, independent store on the corner was a regular stop for locals, known for its eclectic mix of merchandise and warm atmosphere. Sarah, the saleswoman, had been working there for just over a year. She was a hard worker, always ready to help customers with a smile, but she had strong opinions and never shied away from speaking her mind. She was proud of her values and tried to reflect them in everything she did, even in the workplace. The store was a place of community for Sarah, where she enjoyed meeting people from all walks of life. But that afternoon, things were about to take a turn that would challenge her in ways she hadn't anticipated. It was just past noon when he walked in. The man was dressed casually, not standing out in any particular way except for the bright red hat perched on his head. It read, "Make America Great Again." Sarah's heart sank as soon as she saw it. The MAGA hat had become a symbol of political division, something she associated with views she found disturbing. She had always been outspoken about her own beliefs. She was a progressive, and the rhetoric tied to the MAGA movement deeply conflicted with her views on inclusivity, equality, and compassion. Seeing the hat triggered a reaction in Sarah, one that made her uneasy but also resolute. She wasn't sure why, but she felt compelled to act on that unease. She had always been firm about maintaining a welcoming space in the store. The store was meant to be neutral ground where people could shop without the weight of political or social battles. At least, that's what Sarah had always told herself. And yet, something about that hat seemed to undermine everything she stood for. She didn't want to cause a scene, but Sarah felt her anxiety rise as she watched the man meander through the aisles, casually inspecting the shelves. With each step he took, Sarah grew more agitated. She couldn't help but think of all the, news reports, the divisive rhetoric that had been associated with the MAGA movement. Her mind raced through the headlines, the protests, the hateful words she had heard from supporters of that political agenda. She felt as if the man's presence represented everything she found wrong with the current political climate. But this was her workplace, her safe space, and she couldn't allow what she saw as a symbol of division to enter it without confronting it. Sarah knew she couldn't allow her personal feelings to affect her professional conduct. But, as the moments passed, she found herself struggling to separate the two. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she took a deep breath, steeling herself for what she was about to do. She would go up to him, politely ask him to remove his hat, and explain that the store didn't allow political symbols, even if she personally disagreed with it. It would be uncomfortable, but it would keep the store a neutral space. At least, that's what she told herself. With resolve, Sarah made her way toward the man, her feet heavy on the floor as she approached him. "Excuse me, sir," she said, her voice firm but professional. "I'm going to have to ask you to remove your hat. We don't allow political symbols in here." The man paused, looking at her as though he hadn't quite processed what she'd said. For a moment, he simply stood there, bewildered. "I'm sorry," he said, his tone confused. "It's just a hat. I'm not causing any trouble." "Understand," Sarah replied, her voice steady. "But the hat is a political statement and we don't allow that kind of thing in the store. It's meant to be a neutral space for everyone." The man's brow furrowed. "It's just a hat," he repeated more slowly now. "I didn't come in here to argue, I'm just looking around." "I know, but..." Sarah's voice faltered for a moment, uncertainty creeping in. She had expected more of a confrontation, more resistance. Instead, she felt as though she was being backed into a corner. Was she being too harsh? Was this really about the hat, or was it about her own deeply held convictions? "I'm afraid I can't allow you to stay with that hat on," she said more firmly, trying to regain control of the situation. "I need you to take it off, or I'm going to have to ask you to leave." The man stood there, silently considering. Her words. He sighed, clearly frustrated. "I get it," he said, and Sarah felt a slight shift in the tension between them. "You don't agree with my hat, but I don't think it should matter, especially in a place like this." She could feel herself growing defensive. "It's not about agreeing or disagreeing," she said quickly. "It's about the store maintaining a neutral environment. We want everyone to feel comfortable here." The man looked around at the store, as though taking in the entire atmosphere before his eyes met hers again. "I don't think you understand," he said slowly, his voice carrying a different tone now, one that was harder to read. "This is my store." Sarah blinked. "What?" "I said," the man repeated more clearly now. "I own this store. It's mine, and I'm being asked to leave my own business because of a hat." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. The words hit her like a sledgehammer. "You're the owner?" she asked, her voice barely audible. The man nodded, his expression now a mix of frustration and disbelief. Yes. And you just told me to leave because of something I'm wearing, something that, quite frankly, shouldn't have anything to do with whether or not I can shop here. Her mind was reeling. The realization that she had just asked the store owner to leave his own business was almost too much to process. She had acted without thinking, without considering the larger implications of her decision. And now, here she was, standing face to face, with the person who owned everything she worked for, realizing that her actions could have consequences far beyond this one moment. I'm really sorry, Sarah said, her voice trembling as the weight of her mistake hit her. I didn't know, I thought... I know what you thought, the man interrupted gently. But that's the problem. You assumed something about me based on a symbol, and you let that assumption guide your actions. You don't know anything about me or my views, but you acted like you did. I didn't mean to disrespect you, Sarah said quickly. I thought I was doing the right thing, trying to maintain a neutral space here. I didn't think it would be like this. The man sighed, looking at her with a mixture of disappointment and understanding. I appreciate the apology, but next time try to keep your personal views in check when you're at work. This store is a place for everyone, not just people who share your beliefs. Sarah stood there, stunned. She couldn't believe what had just happened. She had let her personal feelings cloud her judgment, leading to a situation where she had asked the store's owner to leave. She had made a mistake, one that was rooted in her own biases. The thought of losing her job over something like this was terrifying. But it wasn't just about her job. It was about learning from her actions and understanding that assumptions, no matter how well-intentioned, can have lasting consequences. The man didn't say another word. He picked up his hat from the counter, put it back on, and turned to leave. As he reached the door, he paused for a moment, looking back at her. We'll talk about this later, he said quietly. As the door closed behind him, Sarah stood frozen, trying to process the weight of everything that had just unfolded. It was a moment that would stay with her for a long time. She had made an assumption, acted on it, and now she had to face the consequences. The experience would be one she would reflect on for years to come, a painful reminder of the importance of treating everyone with respect and not letting personal beliefs interfere with professional decisions.